Murder. The victim is a mother.
She was 8 months pregnant. Family members found the 36-year-old's body.
Murdered on maternity leave, a mother of 3 just weeks away from giving birth to baby number 4. What happened here in Dayton, ugly and brutal.
That was wrong for someone to just take a life like that. Why you can't think that you get a family? Why you can't think?
Janet Dewey was discovered dead in her Dayton home last night. She was 8 months pregnant.
2 murders because the infant in the stomach gone. She also gone.
What started as a horrifying crime scene soon led to a dramatic trial filled with twists, hidden motives, and a relentless search for justice. Who was responsible for Janet's brutal murder? And what really happened in the days leading up to her tragic death? Let's get into it. Janet Dewey was a 36-year-old mom with 3 children living in Perth, Australia. She was a role model within Perth's close-knit Liberian community. She had come from humble beginnings. She came to Australia as a teenager after fleeing the civil war in her native Liberia and had spent years in a Nigerian refugee camp before she came to Australia and worked as an aged care nurse. Janet had also just gone on maternity leave and was 8 months pregnant at the time of her death. In October 2021, Janet was to attend a family commitment but never showed up. Her brother, Darius Dewey, who was taking care of her kids at the time, was worried, so he stopped by her Dayton home, located on Mataro Drive, near Garrido Way, in the evening. Her door was locked. He couldn't get in, so he called a locksmith, and what he saw turned his world upside down. Darius discovered Janet in her bed, bashed and killed. Autopsy showed that Janet was struck in the head 30 times. Not only was Janet killed, but also her unborn child. It was said Janet may have known her killer. Major Crime Superintendent Rod Wild said there were no signs of forced entry to the property, leading police to believe the killer had a key or was let in by Janet. Police had a suspect, which turned out to be 50-year-old Hassan Jabi, a mining geotechnician. Now, it turned out that Hassan was known to Janet. It was discovered that Janet and Hassan were both members of Perth's Liberian community, and Janet's brother, Darius, said Hassan was known to the family, saying, "I know him, we eat with him, drink with him." Although Hassan and Janet appeared to be acquaintances, it turned out that they were more than just that. It was discovered after Janet's death that the father of her unborn, now deceased child was Hassan. And it was discovered that Hassan was married to another woman, although he was separated, but still living with his wife at the time of Janet's death.
An outpouring of grief.
We need justice for our sister.
After a breakthrough in a pregnant mother's murder.
We are broken. Our community is broken.
It is so painful to see that life snatched away from us.
Perth's Liberian community now a step closer to closure. Detectives charged FIFO worker Hassan Jabi with Janet Dewey's murder.
Everyone just burst out in tears. We were crying. People was excited that at least we are getting closure.
The aged care nurse was found dead inside her Dayton home nearly 3 weeks ago. Investigators spent days scouring her house and searched a nearby park last week for a potential murder weapon. Police suspected her killer was someone she knew.
We have been having sleepless nights. The community has been in fear. There has been dark clouds. People barely get like an hour's sleep.
The 36-year-old was just weeks away from giving birth to her 4th child. Her family claims the man police charged is the father.
And he is the person who's responsible for the pregnancy.
The Liberian community further devastated that Janet's alleged killer is one of their own. Family friends say they'd caught up with Mr. Jabi for drinks on the day her body was discovered.
I know him personally.
We eat with him, we drink with him.
And when the family first arrived in this country, I was one of those people that actually opened my arms to the family.
Hassan Jabi faced Midland Magistrates Court this morning just metres from Jeanette's family members sitting in the public gallery.
He couldn't look at him.
He couldn't look at me in the face.
He'll remain behind bars until he faces court again next week.
We are going to work relentlessly with the authority. Anyone who is affiliated to this murder will be brought to justice.
Hassan was arrested and charged with 1 count of murder, as Western Australia's homicide laws do not recognize pre-born children as crime victims. Hassan was put in a holding cell after his arrest, but maintained his innocence. Authorities had then devised a plan to get Hassan to admit to the murder by planting an undercover cop posing as another detainee in the same cell. Unknowingly, Hassan admitted to the undercover cop that he had buried items used in Janet's murder in a vacant block across from his house on Iwasaki Crest in Ellenbrook, like a backpack, items of clothing, and a metal object he said he hit the deceased with. Police searched the site and discovered a blood-stained claw hammer and a pair of gloves with DNA on them that matched Janet. A hard drive containing CCTV footage from Janet's house was also discovered at the site, and it was alleged that the footage showed Hassan arriving at the home just before the murder and putting on gloves. It was alleged that Hassan had unplugged the hard drive from her CCTV, then drove back to his home and buried the items in the lot adjacent to his house. The evidence was overwhelming, but Hassan still maintained his innocence. So the case went to trial. Hassan acquired the help of a defense lawyer named Sean Dworkin. During the trial, Dworkin threw out a lot of theories, inconsistencies, and more to try to prove Hassan's innocence. When the prosecution brought up the CCTV footage showing Hassan at Janet's home just before the murder, he argued that the footage was not clear enough to determine who was entering the property. Dworkin also questioned the undercover cop's testimony regarding Hassan's jail cell confession, stating that Hassan was in custody for 12 hours and was very tired, and circumstances were right for him to make a false confession. But the items that he mentioned during the confession were discovered exactly where he said they were, so the confession was still credible. Dworkin also said that none of Hassan's DNA was discovered in the bedroom, nor were his fingerprints located at the scene. And so he suggested that other people could have been the killer, but claimed police had not properly investigated them. Dworkin told the jury the police were quite content to point the finger at Mr. Jabi and not think outside the box. Among those named as the possible killer was Hassan's own wife, who Dworkin said had the most compelling motive out of any individual to prevent Ms. Dway from giving birth to Mr. Jabi's child. Mr. Dworkin said it was not being suggested that Hassan's wife killed Janet herself, but rather that she was the person who organized it, saying she is at the top of the list. It was further claimed that Hassan had a clear and airtight alibi on the night of the murder. During the trial, Hassan's 15-year-old daughter testified that he was at home with her at the time Janet was attacked. It is also claimed another married man was in love with Janet and was desperate to know who the father of her unborn child was. The married man in question was Gibson Kofa Jarvi. He stated he met Janet in 2017 or 2018 and became friends with her after a gathering on New Year's Day, 2020. In court, he gave evidence that he visited her home, but she did not answer the door, and during cross-examination, the court was shown CCTV footage showing Gibson visiting Janet on 3 Sundays in the month leading up to her alleged murder. These visits included the day she was killed, October 3rd, 2021, which was also on a Sunday. Gibson was pressed by Dworkin on whether he usually waited for his wife to go to work before visiting Janet. Gibson gave evidence that she was more like a sister to him, as they spoke the same language and belonged to the same Liberian community group living in Perth. He also said that he visited her regularly, usually on a Sunday, and claimed that she also came to his home. In Gibson's police witness statement, he said he repeatedly asked Janet who the father of her unborn child was. He was asked if he was desperate to know who the father was, and he said he wasn't. He was asked if he wanted to be in a relationship with Janet, and he replied no, and said that he only wanted to know because she was his friend. Gibson did admit that in a message sent about a week before her death, he called her baby, but said it may have been a mistake through the text. Gibson was then shown CCTV footage, which he agreed showed him arriving at her house at 5:08 p.m. on the day she was killed. The footage shows him knocking on the door, making a phone call, then leaving. He was then shown a second CCTV clip of a man walking up to the house shortly before 8 p.m., which Dworkin put to Gibson that it was him returning to her home. He asked Gibson, "Did you go back to that property that night?" He replied, "No, I did not go back there." Gibson was asked whether he owned a black jacket and green pants, which he admitted he did. A jacket and a light-colored pants were found buried near other items linked to the crime in a vacant block near Hassan's home in Ellenbrook. Gibson also admitted that he did own a number of backpacks in 2021. The man in the later CCTV clip was wearing a backpack, and a backpack was also found in the vacant block. At one point, Dworkin accused Janet's own brother Darius of being involved in her death. In court, Dworkin showed Darius a picture taken off Facebook of Darius standing behind his sister with his arms around her, taken in 2010. He then accused Darius of having a physical relationship with his sister at that time, which Darius denied. Dworkin also cross-examined Janet's mom, Betty, and contended that Darius wasn't her biological son, but that she met him at a refugee camp in Nigeria in the 90s, and that she told authorities he was her son so she can take him with her to Australia, where she settled in 2001. But she denied that was the case. The prosecution redirected the focus back on Hassan, and they presented evidence which depicts him as a desperate, angry man who was losing control and may have done anything to have his way. A recording of a call made on September 3rd, 2021, to Betty Dway, Janet's mom, from a man identified as the accused, Hassan, was played to the court. Police had recovered the recording from Hassan's wife's phone. On the recording, the man is heard telling Betty that her daughter had decided to keep the pregnancy without his consent, despite him telling her, "You are a single mother and you need to go and remove it," and that he didn't want to have anything to do with it, the child. During the call, he can be heard saying pregnancy should be consensual between the two people involved, and Janet's decision to keep it was a selfish position. He said, "Before bringing a child onto this earth, two people have to agree." Weeks leading up to the murder, Hassan had also sent Janet a series of messages urging her to terminate her pregnancy. One of them was a 33-minute voicemail where he called her a prostitute, a harlot, and a disgrace to humanity. Also in the voicemail he said, "If I hear my name mentioned from your stinking self, I will be left with no alternative but to reach out to you. To reach out to you, it will be ugly." Hassan had also been interviewed by authorities, where he stated that he told Janet to terminate the pregnancy as he was still technically married at the time, and it would look bad, as he was bothered that Janet had told some people he was the father. But Dworkin said that Hassan was not convinced the child was his, and said it makes no sense he would kill her to prevent her from giving birth to a son that may or may not be his. Ultimately, after the 7-week trial, Hassan was found guilty of Janet's murder. At the sentencing hearing, Dworkin said how Hassan still did not accept the verdict, but said the offending was truly horrific. Dworkin also gave the judge background info about Hassan's past, which he said contributed towards the awful crime. Dworkin told the court Hassan was the product of an affair and was exiled by his mom to live with his uncle and then his biological dad. Later, he and his family fled West Africa's Ivory Coast during a civil war, where they found themselves as refugees in Sierra Leone and Papua New Guinea. It was said that Hassan watched his youngest brother being shot dead in front of him and watched another refugee get shot dead by rebels. The court was also told that Hassan was suffering from psychosis at the time of Janet's murder and suffered delusional beliefs and hallucinations in the days prior. However, the prosecution stated that Hassan's actions showed he had an intention to kill Janet, and he had a history of domestic violence. Despite Hassan's traumatic past, on February 25, 2025, he was sentenced to life in prison for the murder of Janet Dway and will be eligible for parole in 24 years. The murder of Janet Dway was a heartbreaking and senseless act of violence that not only took her life, but also that of her unborn child. Despite Hassan's continued claims of innocence, the overwhelming evidence ultimately led to his conviction, ensuring that justice was served for Janet and her family. This case highlights the devastating consequences of secrecy, betrayal, and unchecked rage. But even with a guilty verdict, lingering questions remain. What do you think about the defense's alternative theories? Let me know your thoughts. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and share this video. Your support is appreciated. See you next time on Melanin Mysteries.